Hello, community members. Welcome to Women's March Napa Valley Community Forum with People's Collective for Change. And my name is Irit Weir, organizer with Women's March Napa Valley. And I go by she, her, hers, and I identify as POC, as both parents were born in Iran and I was born in Israel, Palestine. This conversation is very difficult. Very, very difficult, and I can feel my butterflies as we each are asked to open many layers of denial. And we don't really have the language per se, or the full understanding of how to even enter this conversation. So be with us, but we do have the privilege to influence. The horror and heartbreak of George Floyd's murder has entered the many layers of denial of many white and non-white people. And it started a collective awakening of our history of systemic oppression of Black and Indigenous people in this country. For me, it was the first time in my life that I understood systemic oppression from the point of view of youth from Auckland. And when I listened to them, they said something that was, that I learned from, and they say that even ratifying the 13th Amendment was a continuum of prison system and the system of convict labor called peonage. And this is why Black people don't trust voting, and even amending the Constitution does not mean so much to them. So this awakening right now, if we feel that we are allies and we want to give oxygen of hope, I hope that in this conversation today and in our nation, that we can look at justice of education, of economics, of health, environment, and politics. I know I have my blind spots, my biases, and the last many weeks and months, also because of COVID, we are allowed, or we have this time to pause and reflect and really feel our feelings. So what a blessing. So this conversation is not about shaming, as we know that shame can only live in the dark and within the system of denial. And it takes us away actually from being responsible. So each of us can look at our biases and ways that we benefited unknowingly or knowingly, and still benefiting from this system. So today our mission is to be part of deeper understanding of systemic oppression, police brutality, defunding, and reorganizing our resources in Napa. So some people, said, well, there are many great apples, and meaning great cups. We are not saying that aren't, of course, but the tree is sick. So, and in order to heal, we need to look at the root problem, which is systemic. It's not about good apple, bad apples. And we need to heal the systemic illness that started 400 years ago. So here in Napa, in recent days, we witnessed the police union posting an invite for white supremacy gathering, Back Blue. And when we look at Napa racist history and the elimination of Native Indians and also Black population from 1860 till 1880, this time it's really a wonderful invitation to be courageous and to look at how all those injustices overlap. So I'm so happy that we have our the People Collective for Change. I just want to share a story how I met Jada. And I love her so much. So as you know, Women's March Napa Valley, we had to cancel our the protest that we planned last minute. But still lots of us came to the streets on Sunday, and we saw many people. And then I saw Jada with the megaphone, and I started crying because there's something about her that really touched my heart. But also seeing Napa so diverse, Black, Indigenous, POC youth was one of the best moments in my life in Napa. And when I asked Jada, I said, wow, did you organize when? And she said, no, I just came to the street because I saw Women's March canceled and someone gave me a megaphone. And I said, so just someone gave you a megaphone? And she said, yeah, someone gave me a megaphone and I was really nervous. But then I talked to myself and I said, Jada, be brave. So today I want to take the time because, well, I spoke with Jada just a few hours ago and Jada lost her cousin. He was murdered by police violence a week ago on Thursday. So Jada is grieving and she might not stay for the whole hour and a half, but she wanted to be here. And I feel that this conversation makes it so real, not that it was not real before, but I want us to really nurture and where is Jada? Give her all the energy. You don't have to talk if you don't want to talk today. We love you. You are a big inspiration to all of us. Really, when I saw you the first day, I felt so inspired. I knew that I need to follow. So we are hosting the People Collective for Change, Gabriela Fernandez and Jada Dunn, Brianna Wilson, Joshimar Graham, and our facilitator is Shelly Webster. And but first, a blessing from Charlie Toledo. She's the director of SOSCO. No, I'm not. She told me how to say. It's not SOSCO, but she'll tell you how we need to say Intertribal Council. So thank you so much for being taking part of this conversation.
I want to thank everybody for coming to this evening, and we come together on the shoulders of our ancestors. Each one of us is here standing on those that came before us, our parents, our grandparents, but we stand on the land, on the bones and the blood of the first people of this region. This is the oldest inhabited place in North America, continuously inhabited place. The Onisati people, the Putwin, the Miwok, the Pomo, Concow, the Wailaki, lived here for tens of thousands of years, continuously inhabiting this beautiful valley. They lived in permanent villages as civilized people. The Onisati, the Putwin, the Miwok, the Ohlone, Pomo, Wailaki, Maidu, Concow. Those are the tribes from the region around. There were 4 tribes here that lived here in permanent, peaceful villages for about 60,000 years, continuously civilized, sharing a life, sharing the abundance and the beauty. In less than 25 years, they were wiped out, nearly wiped out. They're still here. We are still here. In 25 years of Euro contact, this beautiful, civilized people were put into near oblivion. And it's not just the bodies and the hearts of these people, but the names. When I say these names and I call the names of the tribes that were here, living along this river valley and up around the creek, this was a fully inhabited. Every square inch of California was fully inhabited for thousands and thousands of years. And how many of you even know the names of these people, of what they called themselves in their language? So on behalf of those first people, we draw strength for the survivors of those First Nations. There are still people who are what we would call full-blooded Onisati, full-blooded Pomo and Miwok and Maidu. Some of them are listed as terminated, exterminated. The people were paid to hunt and kill them. But somehow, we all survived. I'm a descendant of the Towa people. My grandparents were taken as babies and raised as slaves in the families that just sold them. And still, I found my way home. I always say, how long would it take you to find your way home if someone came into your home and killed your parents and the babies and the children right in front of you and dragged you off far away? And I would say it would take 3 generations to recover from the harm, but we are at the third and fourth generations of the California tribes of this region, and they are thriving. They didn't just survive, they're thriving. The state of California wouldn't be even solvent now if it wasn't for the gaming tribes that have held it up through financial worry. So on behalf of those first people, a song of continuation, a song of resilience, a song of not survival, but thrival, resiliency. Yahi-yo. Ho, 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 ho. Yahweh, Yahweh. Yahweh, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here with you today.
Thank you, Charlie. Thanks so much. As Arita said, I'm Shelley Sir, and my pronouns are she. I'm honored to be moderating this community forum today. I want to introduce myself just briefly so you kind of have an idea of how I came to this work, because I want to state the obvious that I'm a white woman that's now about to talk about race and really and moderate this forum with 4 people of color. When I finished a master's in gender and intercultural communication from San Francisco State in 1990. And from there, I went on to actually co-create diversity programs with my partners who are people of color for nonprofits and corporations, and nonprofits like the Exploratorium of San Francisco. And as companies and institutions started to wane on their own kind of true commitment to diversity, I moved over into leadership and organizational development. And I had a family, and I moved from San Francisco to Napa Valley 17 years ago and continued to work in organizational development. After the murder of George Floyd, I really felt called to action. And along with my 16-year-old daughter, who's Korean American, I joined the protest in downtown Napa. One thing that stood out to me is I remember the Women's March 4 years ago that was so amazing. And, but I remember one sign that said, "Gee, I didn't see you at the Black Lives Matters protest." And it really hit me. And it really hit me when I thought, you know, that this was my moment to be called to action. And what have I been doing other than raising kids for 17 years? But I needed to do something more. So I walked on 2nd Street and I turned the corner on Main Street. And like Arit, I saw Jada, who I know went to school with my son, who's just graduated from Napa High. And I saw her in the middle of the street leading the way. And I thought, wow, it was just it was an amazing moment. And it was absolutely where we all needed to be in that moment with her leading us. And then I saw Bree. And I heard their stories. I listened to their experiences. We chanted in Black Lives Matter. We came to the streets for the next 3 weeks. And I was inspired, and I knew that I needed to do more to hold myself accountable, to continue my journey, to identify and to dismantle my own racism and the systemic racism around us. So I wouldn't be doing my work again if I didn't call out the obvious that I am a white woman, and I'm moderating this. I want you to know that Arit and I did meet with the People's Collective for Change, who's here with us today, to plan this session. And we did ask them if they were comfortable with me moderating. And we were okay if they weren't. And they were gracious enough to give me this honor. And in fact, Gabby, I think you had said to me, you insightfully said, as long as I wasn't coming to this place of learning, as I was coming to this as a place of learning, and that I didn't come in saying, oh, I understand, or I know exactly how you feel, because white people really can't fully understand. And she was good for me moderating, and I appreciate that. So you guys have been incredibly gracious, and I'm happy to be here. So I'm here to facilitate the session and to help amplify voices, to amplify their action plans for the People's Collective for Change. And so I want to go ahead and do that. If the audience members, if you guys have questions, if you could look, if you're not familiar with Zoom, you'll see in your bottom, in the middle of your bottom of your screen, if you put your cursor there, you'll see that you can join in the chat. And in the chat, if you want to write ask, and after ask, you can put ask Jada or ask Gabi, and then put your question. Then we will do our best to get back to them. I want to ask everybody to keep their microphones muted if you're not speaking, because it can help shut down on the noise. That mute is in your lower left-hand corner. If you hear something that you like, and I was asking my my son who's helping me drive this today, and I've sat in on some really heartfelt forums with him and his college friends. You know, if you see something that you like, you know, snap, clap with your mute on, and so that we can see if you know, if something really resonates with you. We'd love to see that. And you can also use your reaction button in the middle of your screen too, to clap or to do a thumbs up. So without further ado, I want to start with, if we can, with Brianna, or actually I don't think Bree's here right now. But I want to add, my first question is, if each of you could give us a 5-minute introduction so we can get a better sense of kind of who you are and maybe why you came to this work. And Joshimar, can we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hello everyone. So my full name is Joshua Graham. I typically go by Josh. So I kind of have an extremely long story about how I came to Napa, but the gist of it is I was born in Jamaica. I lived there for 10 years before I moved to the States. So I moved to New York, Jamaica, New York, funny enough. And then I was living in Queens. After that, I moved to New Jersey, and then finally to California. So I wouldn't say that I've been a lot of places, but the places that I have been very culturally diverse. I've learned quite a bit from there. And I've seen many different walks of life that have allowed me to kind of look at things in a holistic way. Moving to Napa, though, was probably the hardest move that I've been through. It was very jarring going to a school and seeing not a single person that looked like you. And then when you did find the ones that looked like you, all you would hear is the horror stories about what was going on there. So just a quick kind of story to encapsulate my first day of school was in my photography class. We started talking about photos from the days of the civil rights movement. And when the photos of young Black men getting lynched came up, I was sitting in the back of the class because I just came in. I didn't even have my name registered in the class yet. And everyone turned around and looked at me, and they stared at me waiting for a reaction. And that kind of set the precedent for the rest of my Napa High career, because at every instance, everything that I did, people would always turn around and wait for a reaction. So that kind of led me into becoming a very restrained person. I think my actions through deeply, because I understand that even though it's unfortunate that I have to be the archetypical Black male in Napa, I do view it as a responsibility that I'm willing to uphold. So I take it very seriously. I make sure that I carry myself in a way that is both respectful to people that aren't even here yet and the people that are here. So I want to make sure that I set a welcoming attitude towards everything, just so that if the next time we see a 6'5" or 6'4" Black man walking down the street, your first reaction is to say hi instead of asking him if he plays basketball or why he's angry and stuff like that. So that's kind of how I view it. To kind of talk about the meeting with the People's Collective, it's actually a really funny story. So we came together really, really quickly. Gabby and Bree actually had started the People's Collective by themselves. They were doing their work on the side. And I had gotten invited by a couple friends of mine on Twitter, actually. I've been staying extremely low key because I'm getting out of Napa pretty soon. I got a full ride scholarship to Davis, so I was on my way out, and I started seeing all of these things popping up on the internet, and I have my own opinions on them, but I've always felt that I needed kind of a degree or something to speak on this. Like I felt like I wasn't accurately prepared. I felt adequately prepared. I felt that just going out and voicing your opinions, while it is needed, people need to also be able to defend their opinions. But when I look at the things that I've been through in Napa, specifically when President Trump got elected the first year and Napa held that huge walkout where Justin Siena, Vintage, and a bunch of other schools, we filled up Memorial Stadium. I was a part of that. I was part of the team set up to organize that. And I've been volunteering at the Boys and Girls Club, a psych, sociology major, just all of these different puzzle pieces started falling into place. And I started getting obsessed with what can I add to this conversation, or what can I clarify in this conversation? And that led me to reaching out to Bree and Gabby because I saw they were doing their work. They were setting up a march, and I had already had a group of about 14 people that we didn't have the same passion that Gabby and Bree had, but we had the workforce, we had the ideas, and we basically, I felt like having a group of leaders that were that passionate would have just skyrocketed us. And it's exactly what happened. When we reached out in the span of a week, we set up an organizational structure. We kind of made the whole team use their specific talents to make sure that everything goes as well as possible. And personally, like I've joined the group specifically just to be able to articulate a lot of the emotions and thoughts that Black people are having right now. But I think I'm in a very good position to do it simply because of living in Napa and understanding the people here, understanding what they respond to and how they respond to it. And I'm not a very emotionally charged person, even though there's nothing wrong with that at all. And it's very applicable in most cases. But I'm not a very emotionally charged person. I sit down and I talk to known white supremacists all the time to have these discussions, to try to understand where they're coming from, looking at it from a psychological perspective, and trying to figure out where is our common ground and what do we disagree on. And that's what I've been trying to bring to the to PCC. I've been trying to be that voice of reason, that voice of logic before action, and making sure that how we remember Black Lives Matter in this moment in history is not one of destruction, but one of growth, one of unity. And that's kind of my ultimate goal with the entire organization.
Cool. Great. All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Gabby, you want to?
Yeah, happy to hop in. I don't know how you follow up that that incredible introduction, Josh Umar. But I'm Gabby for short for Gabriella. I am born and raised in Napa Valley. My whole life, I actually went to St. Helena High School, all of St. Helena schools, and graduated from St. Helena High in 2011, and immediately transferred over to St. Mary's College, where I attended for 4 years. I was originally studying to actually do community civic engagement, specifically for what we're currently doing right now. But St. Mary's not being a very cheap school to attend. My mother and I had to have a very long conversation my junior year about where I was going to be taking my degree, the types of jobs I was going to try to obtain afterwards, and taking a look at my debt. She didn't feel it was the smartest decision. Like most parents are probably like, not sending you to college to come out not making any money. So I tried to explain to her where my passions were, and we compromised on essentially obtaining my business degree in marketing, but I've always continued my passion for sociology, ethnic studies, which I double minored in, as well as community engagement. I was a social justice facilitator for all 4 years of my college experience, working with a professor who specifically was involved in this line of work, and going to businesses and other leadership groups, teaching them about diversity, about different isms, because we're, our personalities, we have multiple intersections of our life. You could be, a woman and oppressed, you could be Black, and if you're Black and a woman, you kind of have this double intersection. And how does that play in terms of the oppression that certain people go through? And I guess where my involvement in all of the community activism first started was just growing up in the Valley. This place being primarily now almost 50-50 Latin American and Anglo-American. It was really alarming growing up and seeing the large disparity between how Latin Americans were treated in this valley and how whites were treated in this valley. And I quickly was able to catch on. I was quickly able to catch on to that while I was going to school within the education system, from something as simple as we just don't have diversity in our education. We're not learning about other cultures, to also just how I was made to feel about my own education experience, and certain teachers telling me that I didn't have to try as hard because it wasn't expected of people my kind, and then, you know, having my peers who looked exactly like me telling me that I didn't have to try as hard because clearly we weren't appreciated, and kind of always having this struggle of knowing that I didn't view myself as any less capable because of my skin color, and almost this frustration that it was kind of accepted that it was okay to achieve less or want less simply because that's the way that society has always made the narrative be. So I took it upon myself growing up to always ensure that I was involved in advocating for not just myself, but for anybody who was in a marginalized box, for lack of a better word. And I took that in almost every facet of my life, from high school and nonprofit organizations that I would work to try to assist, to even at St. Mary's. While I was there, I helped put together the Occupy movements that we saw happen several years ago, and I was also a lead at our Women's Sexual Assault Center and advocating for domestic violence abuse. And I've just done so much that when I finally came back to Napa, I almost didn't have that outlet anymore, just because things here tend to change as you're older, and I didn't really see that there were many people who were wanting to advocate for these things, and you also just get stuck in your routine of, well, you just graduated, so now you need to go and get a job. And when the incident with George Floyd happened, I cried for about a week, and then I told myself, well, Gabby, you can't just sit here crying. Like, go back to what you've always loved, like what you know how to do best, which is ensuring that I utilized my voice to go ahead and express my frustration, express my anger, express my hurt. It wasn't the first time we had seen things like this, and I was getting really sick and tired of coming to the point where we just kind of accept that we see new videos popping up each and every day of different people being used and abused in certain systems, abusing of their power. And I asked folks to meet me downtown if they felt as moved as I did. And I actually wasn't aware that the Women's March Napa Valley was putting on a protest the very first weekend either. I don't have Facebook, so that was probably why I didn't know it existed. But I still felt like I needed to show up. And so I created a small little flyer with my friend, Bobby Bongs, who's from Vallejo. And we spread the word and just asked folks to come out. And to my surprise, then later on, I see a couple of hours as I'm there at noon, Jada and a whole bunch of other students walking around the corner, and they've got a megaphone, and I'm like, heck yes, like this is awesome. And I was just so enamored and taken aback by the leadership that I saw exuding out of Jada, and I almost saw myself in her and how I was when I was her age and in high school. And I immediately knew I wanted to connect with her, because someone with that much passion, who had been able to lead the first protest in the manner that she did, I wanted to be a part of that. And I wanted to make sure that we were utilizing that engagement and that we continue to amplify these voices, because I mean, given the first protest, we know that there are people here in this community who 100% support everything that we're doing and are trying to achieve that world that really does look equal for all of us. So then I got to working with the chief, and he decided to ask me, you know, if I could put together a team to start discussing what defunding the police would look like and what different reforms were needed. And since he is so new to this town, he wanted to hear stories, and I told him I had stories for days, not just for myself, but for multiple people from this community. And very quickly, that's when Josh reached out to me, let me know that he had a whole other group behind him who was in a group chat about, you know, wanting to make sure that they were utilizing their ability to gather and to mobilize and for us to go ahead and start creating action. And from there, it's just been a whirlwind the last 3 weeks. We have so much support from people reaching out, asking us how they can go ahead and donate, how they can go ahead and keep supporting. And so we keep trying to work with moving at 100 miles an hour, but it's so great to be able to be in spaces like this and have our community get involved and learn more about where we come from, what drove these passions, and where we hope to take this this entire organization towards the next chapter and in sustaining this society that we're living in right here for the next future generations.
That's so exciting, Gabby. Thank you. Yeah, and I can imagine. I know I've seen you all in so many different forums, so I'm so glad you joined us tonight. You know, I know you're so busy at this point too. Jada, do you are you? I think you're still out there. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you came to this work, or do you want to take a pass tonight too? You can go either way.
Sure, I can do a little introduction. So my name's Jada Dunn, and I was actually born and raised in Los Angeles in East LA. The community that I lived in was all minority. It was Latinx and African American. And I remember in the first grade, actually, we were reading out of the textbook, and after one of the stories, there was a picture of the author, and she had blue eyes and blonde hair, and I was like, wow, I wish I was American. And my teacher was like, you are American, you know, like being born here means you're American. And my entire, you know, life up to then, I thought being American meant you had blue eyes and blonde hair, or you were just white in general. And in probably like the 6th grade, when I was around 12, me and my best friend Jesse were walking home, and an officer pulled his car over and told us to pull down our socks because they looked gang affiliated. I was terrified of the police, so I immediately pulled them down, but my friend Jesse was definitely a fighter, so he didn't. And the officer ended up not only handcuffing him, but pushing him down on the floor. And we stayed there for like an hour before Jesse's parents came out. And it was really weird. And I mean, it was expected just because, like, you know, we grew up knowing that the police weren't on our side, at least. And it was kind of traumatizing. But I moved to Napa my freshman year, and it was definitely a culture shock. It was crazy. I had gone from a community that was all minority that looked like me to a school that looked nothing like me at all, that knew nothing of my culture, of the city, or anything. There were a lot of students who were ignorant. There were some just flat out right racist acts, but you know, I knew that people looked at me as the prime example of what a Black girl is, or what, you know, a mixed girl is. So I tried to be kind of Little Miss Perfect, just so that no one could ever, you know, put my community down. I did everything and anything to be, you know, the star athlete, the star student, just to not give anyone an excuse. And then towards senior year, I was never really a crazy outspoken person. My mom always told me I'd make a horrible lawyer because I hate arguing, I hate confrontation. But, you know, senior year, things started to get crazy with everything happening with George Floyd and all of the police brutality and just constant videos showing up every single day. I just knew that it was somewhere that I had to be at as of right now. And then this past week on Thursday, with the murder of, you know, my cousin Andres, I definitely had to take a break this weekend, but it hit close to home because, you know, you get so desensitized of seeing constant videos on social media, and you're just like, oh my gosh, like this keeps happening. But when it actually happens to somebody, you know, it's like just a different type of hurt, a different type of level. So I've pretty much just been laying low for right now. All of my social media is surrounding Andres, but I've been working with Gabby and Josh Mara and Bree, and we've been really just trying to make things happen.
Thank you, Gabby. Thanks Jada. Thanks for being here. And I don't know, is Brianna here? Has she joined us?
I haven't seen her name pop up yet, and I did message her, but I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay. Well, if you see, give me a thumbs up.
Definitely.
Okay, cool. I know that Joshimar, he talked briefly about coming to Gabby coming to meet you and Bree, but can you tell us like how the People's Collective for Change actually started with, it sounds like with the two of you?
Yeah, absolutely. So sorry, was that question for myself or for Joshimar?
For you, yeah.
Absolutely. So essentially how it came about was Bree and I had been going to quite a few protests together, and after the first protest happened, and the chief reached out to me and asked me to create this collective. Jada was the first person that I went to, and Brianna, Jada and Brianna were the first people that I went to, because I knew that they were not only passionate about the cause, but I knew that they wanted to actually create change. And it's great when you have passionate people, but my main goal in creating the People's Collective for Change was, you know, who is ready to do some down and dirty work on making sure, you know, that we're tirelessly researching policy, procedures, digging into the nitty gritty of what it would actually take to create the effective change that we're looking to do. And both of them immediately hopped on board. And later that's when Josh ended up reaching out to me on Instagram and seeing that we had created this PCC page. It had absolutely zero information on it. There was just like a black fist as our logo, nothing in the bio, no pictures. And people were like, what is this? Like, what's happening? And like I said, it was just running at 100 miles an hour, that in trying to just get people on board and responding to people's messages. It was those little tiny kinks that we needed to work out that just started developing as we came along. But originally, it really just came from knowing that there were enough people in this community that wanted to make a change, being able to identify specific individuals who I knew would help amplify the movement and our voices, and who I knew were just as passionate about this cause and wanted to create that effective change. And I invited them to this group, which really is just a group of leaders looking to create some effective change and ensure that we are building up this community to really be that the goal of equality and justice for all. And we understand that that is only going to be possible through a collective that is composed of diverse individuals that our community looks like. So if we only ever have one specific type of person leading your city, your town, the county, then you're not including the rest of the voices that are needed in that for you to truly understand what the entire collective of this community looks like. So that's why we call ourselves the collective, the People's Collective, and then for change, because that's clearly what we're advocating for. Not just Black lives. We are heavily running the Black Lives Matter movement here in Napa, but we also understand, like you mentioned earlier, and like so many of my other leaders mentioned, there's a systemic problem here, and it stems beyond police brutality towards Black lives and Black communities, and what we're seeing in Black communities also has to do with our education system. It has to do with, you know, why are we not funding enough money and resources into mental health and social services in our community that can really assist an entire other group of people who we're seeing at alarming rates go through mass incarceration, and it's always marginalized communities. And so really understanding that overall we really want to help the people of color in this community and learn to create Napa as that model for that community, so that others get inspired to realize that it is 100% possible.
Yeah. And my understanding is that you guys, I mean, this is really just in the last like 3 weeks or 1 month, right? I mean,
literally in the last 3 weeks we've been running. I mean, I do have to say this, my team is incredible. We are up until midnight, 1 o'clock, sometimes 2 in the morning, texting back and forth. And it's gotten to the point where I'll have my family tell me, you know, like, Gabby, you need to take care of yourself. Like, you need to sleep, you need to eat, because I forget to do that because I'm just so enthralled in what's happening, and I want to be as responsive as I can. And I never want to let anybody feel like we're not touching up on everybody's important topics that they're looking to discuss. But receiving many comments from folks is great to know that so many people care, but has been just a tad bit overwhelming in the sense that it's a little difficult to reply to everyone in a timely manner. And I know that's something that I personally get anxiety for is people feeling neglected. So if any of you out there on this Zoom call have reached out to us and we haven't gotten back to you, please have patience, because this is all just so brand new.
Don't go away, huh? Like, you know, keep
stay with the fight. Keep the foot on the gas. No brakes.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So I guess one of my questions is that, you know, this is, since it's been such a whirlwind, I mean, for any of you, what do you think has changed? I mean, I realize the murder of George Floyd, but right, we had Trayvon Martin, we had, you know, there's a list of hundreds and hundreds of people who've been killed with police brutality and black youth and black people. And so tell me, you know, what do you think is this? Do you see a sea change, or are you starting to go, no, we're going to be going back to where we were before. We're all going to go back and do our jobs and forget about this? Or, you know, what do you see going on in Napa, and what do you think is changing?
Well, I guess just really quick, I saw Josh Amar take his mute off, so I'll let him take part of this too. But I guess, you know, quickly overall, we're seeing across the nation movements being made. You clearly have the arrest of all officers charged in George Floyd's murder, which is unfortunate that one of them already got released out on bail. And it's unfortunate that that's a reality that we have to live in. But I think it just motivates people to ensure that this isn't something that we're going to stop at. You see in Colorado, the governor ending qualified immunity. You see what's happening right now with Mayor Lyndon Breed in San Francisco, where she is creating a whole new task force for officers who are unarmed, who will be responding to, you know, lots of social services and crises that involve a lot of more mental health. So you see leaders in positions of power making changes. As for specifically Napa County, I'll let Josh take that away, because that is the lovely piece that he is overseeing.
Yeah, and so I actually had a question asked as well. Let me go back to the chat. So I had a question from Richard. So he was asking if have I, Jada, Gabriella, or Bree had exchanges with other Black Lives Matter groups, either reaching out or having been reached out to? And if so, have we found that we're pretty much on the same page, or do we have different philosophies? So I'm going to try to tie everything together here as best as possible. So don't mind me if I ramble a little bit, but kind of what Gabby's been saying is that there has been a huge push in efforts and willingness to reform, and it's been happening at rates that I didn't really see or necessarily want, to be honest. I love everything that's going on in San Francisco, and I love specific instances of people using models of the past, reinventing them and adapting them to our current society, and they weigh the risk and benefit of certain decisions. So I've been seeing a lot of that, and I've been loving it. So to address Richard's question, though, the part of it that I haven't, and sorry for saying your first name, I just didn't know how to say your last name, but so the part of it that I don't particularly like is the fact that we have been in contact with a bunch of different I wouldn't necessarily call them Black Lives Matter groups or activists, but there are individuals that have reached out that are in Napa, and that's predominantly what I'm going to be speaking of. And we've had these conversations with them, and PCC is looking at this at a fundamental level where we understand that while the typical American isn't walking around with a racist ideology, they're not sitting there hoping to put down another race in order to gain money or status or anything. There is a fundamental issue of a system that was made with no people of color in mind. So it's almost like we're using a car that wasn't supposed to fit this many amount of people, but yet we still trying like to shove everyone in there. So we kind of understand that. And one of the issues that I've been seeing is that a lot of the other smaller Black Lives Matter groups, and some of the bigger ones too, they're not exempt from shame. It's almost as if they're lashing out at specific instances of things that they can kind of see, okay, there we go. There's the enemy that we've been fighting against all along. And that right now is showing us police brutality, where it's this idea that, getting rid of the police or fixing the issue of policing is going to be a ripple effect that causes everything else down the line to kind of be fixed. That's one ideology. The other one says that once you finish with the police, then it's time to focus on something else and we keep going. That's kind of where PCC is at, while some of the other ones are on the other end of the spectrum where things kind of start and end with the police. So for me, and I've been very vocal about this, I'm not speaking for Gabby, Bree, or anybody else in PCC, but I've been very vocal about this. I have been researching history of socialism, capitalism, Marxism, as many of them as I can, to kind of learn about the precedents that were set before this. And one of the things that I've been seeing is that we're almost moving too fast. I feel like a lot of the core ideas of the Black Lives Matter movement are getting dispelled and or diluted by other messages. Because at the end of the day, I truly still just believe in the 3-letter acronym. Like, it's supposed to mean Black Lives Matter, and that's our end goal. That's what we're supposed to be moving towards. But instead, our legislators and our people in offices are giving us things that we don't want. No one asked for a street to be named after Black Lives Matters or anything of that sort. Because at the end of the day, you have that street, and in that same city, you have people that are predominantly Black as the only representation of poverty in those cities. So it's almost like, okay, so we're slapping these Band-Aids over everything repeatedly and doing this, and it's almost as if we're not really making any further progress. But the good end of that kind of thought process, though, is the fact that we do have the energy to actually make change. So even though some of it isn't necessarily as efficient as we want, I personally take this over anything else, because I forgot what doctor said this, but he put it wonderfully. He said that if we had reacted by sitting inside of our home and continuing our daily lives after we saw a man get publicly lynched, he wouldn't know what America represented anymore. And I think that's absolutely true. So basically, just all in all, Richard, PCC has had conflicting opinions with other Black Lives Matter groups, but we completely respect, and not only respect, we will support many of their decisions on what they need to do, because again, this is a collective change. And if even one person is left out, then you're not really representing what we stand for. So we are trying to get different voices heard and everything like that too.
Now, I know that you guys are specifically working, you've talked about working with Chief Plummer, so our Chief of Police here, and also I know that when I talked to you before, that there was other groups that you were starting to, or other people you're reaching out to in the community, and that you specifically, each of you have been taking kind of a different, I don't know, like, if I will, a little silo or something to work on. So do you want to speak to some of that, like the action plans that you're doing, and maybe how other people can help if they want to jump on board? Or
Oh yeah, absolutely. So kind of like how Gabby was mentioning, I'm dealing with the political aspect of PCC. So basically, I kind of look over policies, and I've spent the last 6 days going over they have 6 or 7 different budgets floating around for Napa right now. Been going over those, been going over the revised policies for the police departments and everything. So that's kind of been my job in this whole scenario. And what the focus is to create one, I understand, again, that I'm not in a position to make a lot of these decisions, because there are people that have been spending their lives doing this. And those are the people that I think need voices right now. And those are the people that I think should have the final actions and the final says. So what personally I'm trying to do is I'm trying to ensure an elevated level of life for all people of color in Napa, but while also understanding the risks that are posed by proposing any of these new policies and stuff. So I've been a very moderate voice in this, and I've gotten a lot of flack for it. I've said it multiple times. I'm in the Napa Register for saying I'm not of the opinion that we should burn down the police department without a solidified alternative, because I've been at the level where I've been showering out of buckets and I've been having my housing applications denied and things like that. So I understand the unintended consequences of bringing this conversation to the people out here. And I've been seeing a lot of people get very angry that we're not just saying, hey, like, just get the police out of here. Like, we just need this to completely change. And the truth about it is, what you guys can do to help us out, or even specifically my portion of the whole thing, is that we need to go to the city council. We need to go to the city council. We need to go to Mike Thompson. We need to have these discussions on a bigger scale where it's not just PCC representing what we want and they can identify us as an entity with an agenda. It has to look like a holistic movement, because I'm telling you, like, after going through all of those things and going through the policies and writing up the parts about the budget that we didn't like and what we wanted to get changed, all of us sat through the council meeting yesterday, and I even went to where they had it in person. There's no one there. That's the first thing. They were on recess for about 2 hours, no kind of conversations with anyone. And then they didn't address any of our emails that we sent. And I know for certain, I have records of at least 30 different people sending in an email, and none of them were addressed. So if we were going to specifically talk about things to help, like that probably is the best way to do it. And if you have any personal connections where people are in power or anything like that, and you can send them our way and ask them if they're able to have a conversation with us, I think that's the best way that we could get this conversation moving further.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Shelley, to add to Josh Emar's point, with yesterday's Board of Supervisors meeting, I'm actually quite shocked that the County Board of Supervisors, no one on that board has reached out to PCC when so many other people are reaching out. And I know they're aware of what's going on. I mean, we've been in the register twice, almost 3 times now. Folks are, if we're getting folks reaching out to us from multiple other areas, I just would be very surprised if they hadn't heard of PCC, especially when leaders like the DA, like the sheriff, like the chief are already talking to us. So the frustrations with yesterday's meeting, I couldn't physically go, but I clicked onto the Zoom link that they had sent out to the public that was available, and they were muted the entire time. So I couldn't even listen to what was being said during the meeting. And I think those are the things that are really alarming to me, to know that there are people in positions of power who are seeing that there's unsettlement happening in their community, and to not address the questions, including city council last week during their meeting, where a couple of people were posing questions regarding the Black Lives Matter movement, regarding the protest, and for a complete failure on everyone's part to address what's happening right now, I think speaks volumes in terms of the inadequacy of the leadership that we have in place. And so really getting everyone else to understand, if you do know how to touch points with folks in those positions of power, is like, let us know. We would love to be able to have conversations with them. If you yourself are in a position where you're able to do something, please reach out to us. Ask how you can help. Let us know, what field it is that you work in, and I'm sure we will find something to be able to have everyone help us with. But one thing that we do know for sure is advocacy is huge. Representation is huge, especially every single time we put out flyers for protests. Yes, I think it's great to have multiple people show up, and I would love to see more and more people showing up. The third week we had our protest, significantly decreased amount of numbers, and I fear that as everyone's social media timelines start to kind of go back to this normal on folks not focusing so much on the real realities of what's happening, I encourage you to keep shaking the ground and disrupting, your friends' timelines. I encourage you to continue having conversations around racism, around what you specifically feel is wrong right here. I think when we're able to share those stories and humanize our own experiences, we view each other as exactly that, as humans who are just trying to coexist in this environment in the most equal way possible. And it takes all of us to go ahead and amplify those voices and be able to create that change, not just by physically showing up at protests, but going out and voting, and making sure that your voice is heard on paper in the voting ballots, so that we can get those leaders, the right ones who look like us, who represent everybody in this community, on those boards. And I know Bree, although she doesn't still seem to be on the call, something that I'm really grateful for her for doing at this moment is she's really ensuring that she's overseeing our Know Your Rights campaign, as well as the voting campaign, which is primarily going to be reaching out to the community and educating them on what are your upcoming propositions that are going to be on your ballot, and here's how we're breaking them down so that you can adequately understand them, because there's so much jargon in there that people get confused and they end up thinking they're voting for one thing, but they misunderstood, you know, all the crazy weird wording that they put on purpose to trick you so that you end up voting for the exact opposite thing that you're trying to vote for. And so she's going to take that upon herself to really break that down. I work for Wind Down Media. A lot of you know my face as being the morning show host for that show. And so I'm working with the owners of the radio station to see if we can start a social justice podcast on our AM station where Bree can then start bringing those propositions. And not only will we be able to touch folks on a social media platform, we'll be able to touch them through the audio waves as well, which I think is just, you know, a whole other audience that you can reach. And hopefully that will help advocate for the change and for what's going to be on policy in the upcoming year.
Right. So I have a question. So that you just kind of brought up is that, so one, I want to, you know, I know that in our last census, which is probably not exactly representative of Napa, but we're, I think, 43% Latinx, you know, something like close to 50% of white. And then we have 7% of Asian American, which I actually had to correct our chief plumber about, who seems to be, you know, is doing lots of things right. But I was, he said we barely had any Asian Americans here, and I have to shout out to my own kids who are Korean American, and then we have less than 1% who are Black. And I heard people after George Floyd's murder say, you know, and you know, kind of be like, well, you know, oh, we hardly have a Black population here. And one, you know, having less than 1% doesn't mean zero. And I think one of the things that happens is that I've kind of noticed is that in some of the forums I've been on too, is that people are being really nice. And I hail from Minnesota myself, and there's such a thing as Minnesota nice. And I think it's nice, and at the same time, it really gets a community, particularly a mostly white state, probably to a murder of George Floyd. And I'm not saying that, you know, that's my crystal ball for Napa, but what I want to put out there is kind of like, what advice would you have for us, or what's your kind of insight into kind of Napa nice? Because I see some of the forums are kind of being, you know, everybody's kind of dancing around. And when we have our elected officials on the call, of course, everyone's doing, you know, kind of just trying to go within the lines, and nobody wants to really shake up the conversation or really talk about things. So anyway, that's a lot. Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Oh yeah, so that was also a question I think that was just asked. So yeah, Maya and Tamar, what kind of healing do you think needs to happen in Napa between white and people of color? So I'll try to address some of this, and then anybody else can chime in. But personally, I've been looking over kind of the I wouldn't call it data, because there's nothing really that shows kind of all the information about this, because it's such a nuanced topic. But one of the things that I think needs to happen is that the conversation needs to be clarified. I think people in Napa, both people of color and non-people of color, need to understand what the movement is about and separate personal agendas from the movement. So backstory, I sat down with Sherry, and I think her name was Francine. She was the one that organized the Back the Blue March. So in the middle of these conversations, what you notice is that people are having conflicting opinions on what's going on. You have a lot of 50-50 people in Napa, and that's how I keep referencing them. These are people that aren't racist by decision. They're racist by circumstance, by growth, and not necessarily fully racist, but they could just be prejudiced through ignorance. And that's what I've been noticing with Napa. Napa doesn't really have a particular reason to be a racist community. It doesn't have any real incentive to, especially because there is such a small Black population here. And this is one of the biggest arguments arguments that they have. They're like, we can't even be racist. There's no reason for us to be racist. And it's a just argument. But I think what happens is that they forget that everyone has prejudices and everyone has biases. And when you try to invalidate someone else's, you go down a very, very dark path. And what I think needs to happen in Napa is that we need to pay attention to these nuanced problems that are popping up, because similar to how societies start to crumble when women don't have rights, because women are the first, if you look at women in any society, whenever they're oppressed or whenever their rights are taken away, they're the first flag that this is going to happen to the rest of the population. This is going to happen to people in power. It's just a ticking time bomb. And I think it's the very same thing that's going to happen with Black and then people of color, and then it's going to go on into white communities. The structure of America was built in a way that we uphold values that are no longer here today, and we uphold values that were written by people that weren't thinking about anyone else. It was a very selfish declaration, and it's been working for us so far, but it's only been working just so. It's almost like a spare tire. There are things that everyone needs to admit that, one, America is a great country, but it can be better. And saying that it can be better doesn't diminish anything that is done in the past. It's just simply stating the facts. And I think that's how the conversation needs to start happening, because I have to admit, if you look at it from an objective perspective, the Black Lives Matter movement, predominantly on Twitter, which is where I'm always having these debates, because Twitter is like the collective unconscious of like the world right now. But they're making this movement seem very militarized, seem very anti-white, seem very anti-establishment. And I think that isn't the necessary conversation that we need to have right now. I think that is a conversation that we're going to have. But I think right now we need to take out the militancy in our personal conversations. I'm not talking about on bigger levels, because that is needed. But in our personal conversations, sit down with your friends that you know do not agree with this, but respond to them in a way that would actually be conducive to them actually listening to you. And you can't just tell someone they're racist and then expect the rest of the conversation to go well. You gotta have to give them some and then take some back, and it has to be a compromise in these conversations. And I think that's predominantly what I want to see in Napa. I'm one of the plans, and this is going to be the first place that we mention it, but we've been talking to the chief of police, where we want to have, instead of a protest, it's going to be a forum for discussion, where you have people that believe one thing, and we can categorize them as black, blue, and then you have Black Lives Matter people, and we're going to try to have it so it's a public discussion. People hear what we stand for specifically in Napa, and not the general conversation, but just a concise, this is what we want. Don't confuse us with this. Don't fear us for this. And I think once that starts to happen and these conversations start to happen, we start humanizing not only ourselves, but also the opposition. Because it's just as dangerous to just tell these people that they're completely wrong in what they're thinking, like we should just completely shut them down. That in and of itself creates another pocket of oppression. But yeah, I don't want to ramble anymore. So if anyone else wants to go off about that.
I think it's great. And Joshua, I was just going to say that in growing up in a community the size of Napa that was 99% white, that one of the things that Robin DiAngelo says in White Fragility, and I think it's spot on, is the idea that when we tell ourselves, therefore, then we can't be racist, that actually the things that what our understanding of people of color then are only through the media. And so we're really limited in certainly a vocabulary to have these conversations, but any kind of experience. And so to say that you're not affected by racism and that you can't be racist is kind of far from the truth, at least in my belief. And, but that it really, you become very limited, particularly if you haven't had a chance to be out in the greater world. So,
right.
Gabby, do you have a...
Yeah, I was just going to say, something that you brought up that was a good point even earlier, Shelley, was that you talked about wolf white fragility right now, and then you started off the conversation at the very beginning about how you were the facilitator of the conversation. And I think what's important to note there is I've been hearing, and I know a lot of the leaders in PCC have been hearing this a lot. It seems like there's a lot of white guilt going on at this moment, and a lot of people saying, well, I'm ashamed to be white, I'm ashamed of like what's happening and this history. And I don't think that's where we want anyone to come from. You know, shame is never going to get you into any positive place. I don't believe that shame is what's going to transpire you to want to change. Instead, it's, you know, coming in with an understanding of these things have happened for the last 400 years. Now that you are awakening to kind of having this veil taken off of you and really deeply analyzing the systemic roots and problems that are happening, just go from there. You know, just educate yourself, be willing to open your heart, open your mind, open yourself to having these conversations. I don't think that there needs to be any guiltiness on any level at all, or for anyone to feel bad for being white. On the opposite, you know, recognize the power that you hold, and that when you stick and help amplify the voices of people of color, you create a space that for us just hasn't been able to be done in the last 400 plus years. You know, it seems anytime we try to voice ourselves for anything, people like to quickly say like, oh, well, get over that. Like, it's been so long, and almost like people of color have to forget about what's happened. And so rather than feeling white guilt, I just encourage everyone to not ask any person of color to forget about what's happened. You don't have to feel guilty about what's happened necessarily in the past either, but know the power that you hold, and specifically your decisions and actions on how you can help advance this narrative, this movement, and the future that you want to live in forward.
Yeah, that's great. And one of the things I want to thank you both for, thank all of you, is that, you know, sharing your experiences, certainly out in the protests, but even in forums like this, is really powerful. And it's really important for people to hear and to listen. And I think that, you know, I appreciate that, because I do hear, the one thing I keep hearing, and I've heard for decades, is people of color saying, I'm tired and I'm done. And I hear particularly people of color my age saying, I'm so glad you young people are out in the front, on the front, because I can't, you know, people have been just saying, I can't do this. I have to just take a break. It's too much. I'm overwhelmed. I'm hurt, you know. And so I think I appreciate you for continuing to educate us and being open to these conversations, because at some point, you know, and you don't have to be. And I think that that's important for white people to kind of understand that you can't just go to your best friend, your friend who's your one person of color, and continue to ask them about their pain, because sometimes that can be too much.
Absolutely. It can definitely be too much, and it can just be overwhelming. You know, we said it here, there's less than 1% of African Americans in Napa Valley. So imagine if every single person went to the 1% of African Americans that we had in Napa Valley. Like, how overwhelmed would that population feel? And beyond that, you know, if we, the people of color from this movement, were to remove ourselves from this movement, you know, how many white voices will still be left over to continue amplifying our voices? And so I think that's where I highly encourage everyone, when you ask, you know, what is it that you can do? Ask yourselves, you know, how much am I educating myself? How much do I know about Black culture, about the history of who actually built even Napa Valley? You know, I think we always talk about George Yount, you know, and all these other historic figures on how Napa Valley came to be, but no one takes the time to read. There's actually a really famous book that was written here. I actually just got a copy from one of my colleagues about the hidden history of Napa Valley and the people of color that actually helped build this place. So, you know, I recognize that I myself also have a lot of learning to do in a variety of other spaces. And so I think that's the biggest part, is knowing that we all have something to take away from what's happening here. And if we think that we don't, or that, you know, oh, we know everything that we need to know, then I don't think that we're doing justice by this movement and by what's being asked of everyone at this time.
Yeah. And I think that that's why it was really important. And thank you to Charlie for the blessing at the beginning to, you know, bring back to us to really.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Can I make a comment? Because I've been a political activist since 1966. I'm not new to the movie. I've been on the streets and around the world, the United Nations, human rights and social justice issues since I was 16. And I've lived here in Napa since 1972. And the reason the population only has 1% is that systemic racism. Black people were not allowed to buy houses, to have jobs, to be here after dark until recently. And a lot of my African-American friends from San Francisco, when they would come to visit me, and these are people that started the African-American studies programs at San Francisco State and UC Berkeley, They would come here, and who would be in front of my house within 5 minutes is a police car. And they'd say, oh, Black person drove into Napa on a Sunday. Do you usually have a police car in front of your house? No, I don't. When we went out to dinner, then the police car followed us. It's not accidental that it's only, and then it's not accidental that the Native American population is 0.2%. It used to be 100% of the population almost barely 100 years ago in Napa Valley. And the fact that people don't know the names of the tribes, that's not accidental. That's what systemic means. Systemic means it's built into the system. And anybody who tries to change the system is either killed or neutralized. We used to have helicopters following us around. I mean, for years. Because we were trying, and we have been successful. It took 40 years to get the story of what the indigenous people were and are, and to being able to have it in public forum and be teaching the people without having police at our door while we're doing it, or police following our children around, which is all the things that I lived with. My children were raised here. When you're a political activist and you have children, the police would go after your children. And that happened for 3 years for my kids while they were in high school. When we did the mascot issue, which was just last year, and you see those movies, that was 70 years of people taking ownership of the indigenous people and telling us who we are and who we should be and how we should behave as if we're a possession. So it's really, really important when you start to shift things to understand, to be focused on the solutions, and the baseline solution for racism, systemic racism, is education. I always feel that racism is based in ignorance. And unless we can come together, and people will bash me for the city council people that I sit with or endorse, but I think those are elected officials. They're supposed to be serving us. If they're not responding to us, there's a problem. That's been a problem in Napa for a long, long time. They pretend that, oh, it's not happening. That's not new. And the people that are just discovering, wow, I was trying to call my county supervisor and they never returned my call. Well, that tells you right there, that person is not politically involved, because that has been going on for 20 or 30 years here. So it's a long haul. And then I think what Josh said about is really important about moving too fast. It has to be a sustainable pace. We get all excited because of the adrenaline and also the energy. Everybody's been, Earth put us on timeout. So as a species, if we're going to survive, we have to learn how to come together, not just with each other, but with all the other sentient life on this Earth. And it's not about, I really appreciate having the blessing, but I feel like I am compelled to talk. I have been a political activist here in Napa County since 1972 and on a global scale since 1995 with the United Nations, getting these issues brought at a global scale. My friends in Africa are very concerned. When they come to visit, they won't walk around by themselves. And they're praying for us because they think, oh, well, now they're going to kill you all. And I'm thinking, oh, whatever, so it's all of us or none of us, but not just the two-leggeds, all sentient life. And it's about really focusing on the solution, not the problem. You don't study to cure poverty, you don't study poor people. You have to study the extreme rich, those hoarding people that don't pay taxes and don't share. That's why there's poverty. That's so really look to those big problems and go to what would be the solution. We have to meet with those people. You have to be in boardrooms with them. You have to be on commissions with them. So it's a lot of work, and you really need to pace yourself. So that's all I'm going to say. But you're not alone. I've had a huge amount of people. Most of my friends, the elders that led me, have passed on, but we've been all over everywhere, all over the world, literally.
No, yeah, and I just to add really quickly, I think you put that in. It's almost comforting to hear that, because it's very reaffirming to what I've been thinking as well. I've been getting a lot of comments saying that it's almost insinuating that I'm not angry enough. And I think people don't understand that I'm probably the most angry person in this situation. It's just the fact that I've been angry for so long. This is not anything new to me. It's not newly frustrating to see these things happening. It's not a, wow, this is something out of character. Like, I lived in Harlem. I saw this on a daily basis. I saw in New York, I lived there when we had stop and frisk. So it was just like, we went around, and people, this isn't anything that is just like a moment in history for me. This is something that my whole life has always been leading up to, where it's a culmination of everything. And I think what you said was perfect. We need to start with a whole kind of re-envisioning what the United States should look like post-COVID, because that's exactly what it was. It was a pause on civilization. It's a pause on the human story. And now we get a second chance to write that other chapter. Like, what is this going to be? What is this going to look like? And I think that stems from teaching people not only about other people's history, but also how to accept their own. Kind of from where you were speaking, you knew you had something to say that was of worth because of your pride and your people and your culture and yourself and what you've done. And I kind of linking that to what Gabby said, a lot of people right now that could be really powerful allies that could add a almost devil's advocate portion to this conversation. If they're white, they have a thing about it where they feel like they cannot say anything. And I can understand that, because it's a very thin line that you have to kind of walk on when you're having these discussions. But I feel like it has to be something that they take responsibility of as well. And I've been saying it at almost every single march, that in my opinion, the same way that Black people need to redefine what being Black in America is for ourselves, white Americans need to redefine what being white in America is. And you set that precedent for yourself. You come up with that kind of bar that you're trying to get to. And I think that elevates everyone else to come meet it, instead of like, I don't really particularly like the white fragility kind of talks and everything like that. Not because they're not useful, but because I feel like a lot of the times people cherry pick the information out of those books, and then they post them, and you get a conversation that's supposed to be conducive to growth, and it instead spreads shame. So, like, paradoxically, speaking about white fragility builds white fragility. And it's almost like there's no easy solution to it. I think the only thing that can happen is, just as much as, like, I've been saying it, just as much as we're kind of saying that these situations, like in Napa specifically, we kind of blame it on the white people that are here now. I think there also needs to be some concessions to understand that they're part of a system that they're paying for basically the sins of their forefathers and things, and that you guys get to redefine what it is right now and what you move forward. What is a legacy of white people or people in positions of power in Napa from now on? And I think that whole guilt aspect shouldn't even be a part of it anymore. And I think anyone, especially a person of color that uses that, I don't think they're trying to fight for Black Lives Matter. I feel like that would have to be a personal agenda.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. And I do think, Josh Amar, I guess, I feel like you're right. I mean, you can kind of spiral into these shame conversations. And I think that that's often what people who are really white people who, that are, saying kind of saying there's no systemic racism. They often go back to, oh, you're just feeling guilty. And I don't think that guilt and shame comes in is not very useful. Right. But I think it's also really, I do hear you. And I think it's really important for white people to really think in terms of the systemic racism, to really start to see it. Because I think for a lot of us, we haven't seen it for a long time. We've been ignoring it completely unconsciously or consciously. I realize that we're kind of near the end of, near the end of our time. What I'd love to hear, Gabby, you had started off the session kind of informally. We were talking before we started, and you had mentioned that there's an event, I think this weekend, so if you guys want to talk about that and talk about like next steps, and also how people can reach out to you. And then I think Reed also has a kind of a closing for us, but if you can tell people how to get involved and how to reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can go ahead and email us if you have any other questions. Please feel free to reach out to us at the People's Collective for Change at gmail.com. Really grateful for everyone who's already reached out. We have some really exciting meetings coming up with a couple of people who are also looking about defunding the juvenile jail here, because at the same time we should be investing in our youth and not incarcerating them. And you know, there's a multitude of programming that can go into that, from money that can be taken away from the police department, which is what we mean when we say defund the police, right? I think a lot of people have questions around what does that mean. They think that Josh touched up on it earlier, that we were trying to abolish the police system, and it's not that. It's picture this giant, you know, the Neapolitan ice cream, the big buckets that you would buy in Safeway, and we're just taking scoops one at a time, trying to fund it into social services, trying to fund it into mental health. I encourage you all to if you're skeptical about these things being able to happen, I encourage you to look up programs, models that currently already exist, that are servicing different people. There's a big program that has been around for 30 years that people are just now calling attention to. It's called Cahoots, which maybe some of you have heard of that before. It stands for Crisis Assistance in the Streets, and it's actually coming out of Eugene, Oregon, and it's an excellent model. Last year alone, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, they had about 124,000 calls that were sent to them from dispatch, and of those 124,000 calls, only 159 had to be redirected back to police officers and law enforcement. So you're getting upwards of 124,000 people getting the real care that they need, whether it's, you know, a drug overdose, whether it's, you know, homelessness, if it's, you know, a mental health issue, substance abuse, like whatever that looks like, rather than having an officer who immediately upon you seeing them in uniform escalates the situation, which is, you know, an oxymoron considering one of their tactics for training is de-escalating situations. You know, just finding alternative people that you can actually go ahead and help. So I highly encourage everyone to go ahead and research those models. If you yourself have seen other models that have worked and you feel that it could be beneficial to come to Napa, I encourage you to reach out to us and let us know. We, like I said, have an entire team consistently researching and doing what we can to try to make sure that when we come to the table with the sheriff and the chief of police and the county as well as city council, that we're coming heavily armed and with facts. And I think sometimes that's surprising to them, because they think that, you know, they look at Josh and I and they think that we're just a bunch of kids who, you know, are just angry and wanting to scream change, without recognizing, no, we're very educated and capable individuals who are spending hours upon hours researching, trying to make sure that we not only come to the table prepared, but that we are even beyond prepared, which is a narrative that I know a lot of people of color tend to share, is when we're constantly viewed with our white counterparts, we almost have to have like a 5 times as better resume and know all of these extra things just to offset the color of our skin, which isn't fair. But again, it speaks to our preparation. It speaks to what we already know to be true, and how we end up preparing ourselves for that. So you can reach out to us. I know I went on a ramble right there through our email, the People's Collective for Change at gmail.com. We're also available on Facebook and Instagram at PCC Napa. And feel free to DM us, tag us. We post a lot of our information regarding upcoming protests coming on there. We also love to utilize that platform to educate others on political, historical figures that have paved the paths for so many of us modern day freedom fighters to continue that good fight. And for this upcoming Sunday, considering it is the month of Pride and there are multiple Pride celebrations, Pride actually started as a protest. It was a Stonewall riots back in 1969. And so we are celebrating the Big 5-0 this weekend. And we are doing it in the way that Pride was originally started, as a protest. So on our Instagram page, you will be able to see there is a co-sponsored event. It is actually going to be PCC and RAN, Rainbow Action Network, allies right here for the LGBTQ community. And so we together are putting on a march and a rally in honor of LGBTQ freedom fighters who came before us, as well as standing in solidarity with our Black, Brown, and Indigenous queer siblings family friendly, kid friendly event. We highly encourage everyone to come out. It's going to be at 10:30 at City Hall right here in Napa. And I need to make sure to say Napa because I think folks started getting confused as we were passing the flyer on me and like, yeah, City Hall in San Francisco. And I'm like, no, right here in Napa. You know, there's some things we need to do here in Napa as well. So that'll be this upcoming Sunday, 10:30 a.m. Again, if you have any questions or need a refresher on exactly what that looks like, we have a flyer available on our social media pages, PCC Napa.
And Gabby, I understand we didn't really get into the mechanics of it, but I know some people have been really concerned about the whole phrase of defund the police. But you're really what you're talking about a lot of times is like reallocating funds, like the CAHOOTS program in Eugene, right?
Absolutely. And just to touch on that quickly, you know, if you take a look at Napa County, they're currently trying to build a $128 million jail, which to me is just absolutely bananas when, you know, we already have a jail in place. The goal should not be to continue expanding incarceration. It should be to see how we can restructure the models that we have in place to properly assist for people who are in need of help. And something that we are proposing is, you know, even from that 128 million, if you're even going to take like 10 million of those dollars and invest it in creating some type of program like CAHOOTS, where you're hiring clinicians, medical staff to be able to tend to homelessness, people experiencing substance abuse issues, all these things, like you can get a network already from just $10 million, and out of a $128 million budget, that's very minimal. So, you know, it's not asking for a lot. There's a lot of restructuring that can be done. And at the end of the day, that's what defunding the police really means is reallocating these funds, because at the moment, too much is being asked of the police. They're not focusing on the right things. They're focusing on too many things that they shouldn't be focusing on. And so putting that power into the hands of people who can better service our community is really the goal. And whatever way, shape, or form that looks like, from, you know, not having jails, reinvesting it in our education, coming up with, you know, ethnic study programming for our high schools, for our students. Again, this begins in education. You know, if we don't know the roots and the history of Black culture and Native American culture here, and as Charlie pointed out, you know, if we don't know the names of so many of the tribes that are indigenous here to our land, that is because of our education system. So going back to a space where we make room for everyone, we teach about everyone's culture, it's just so critical, and it's going to take everybody's work. So
yeah, and real quick, just to touch on that, because I do have two of my previous professors in here for English, so shout out to them. They got me to where I am right now, and I specifically think that's one of the reasons why I'm fighting so hard in terms of having these discussions with the police department, because as Gabby's saying, I really want people to understand that it's really not that hard to, like, when I look into it now, I was very skeptical into defunding the police because I just didn't understand how everything was going to work. But the budget in Napa, education is 3.2% of our entire budget. And I just don't understand that because at the end of the day, the police don't, they cost us, I think when I checked the budget, it cost us $32 million in 2018 to 19. They're up by $17,000 in this year, even though we're down $11 million in profits. So we are increasing our costs for spending on the police, but we're cutting legacy programs and programs that are supposed to help the population that's void of opportunity right now to increase their capacity to come back and just help the same town that's losing money. So I really want people to understand that we're not asking for anything that's radical. We're literally just asking for these people to, if they are going to keep this funding, and we can't convince anyone, and we can't get into a position of being able to have that conversation, which I don't believe. I think that we are going to be able to at least tell them to do their jobs at an extremely high level where they become specialists and we don't have any complaints, because I don't know anyone else that I could pay $523,000 a year, not do their job to my specification. And that's what we're paying the sheriff right now. And we had conversations with him where we simply asked for a database of police officers that had misconducts to be published. That's not that hard to do. I could do that without any programming knowledge whatsoever. I could just put up a Google Doc, and they're fighting us on these things. So while I love the radical aspect of this movement, it shouldn't even be seen as radical because these are just logically coherent thoughts. These are just things that are supposed to be a natural extension of where our society has gone. The stultification that's like prevalent in everything that we're dealing with right now, it's disgusting to think that we really believe a society that was built so long ago is going to have completely functional parts 2,000 years later, and it is just not realistic. And I think changing the police is going to set a precedent that we're able to start building a society that currently reflects the diversity, the different gender expressions, and just different types of people that we have in the US now. So it really is about, I mean, it's taking that slogan literally, like we are making America great, but it's not again, like we're just continuing the cycle, you know, we were pushing forward, so.
Right. And I think what Charlie had brought up before is really, this is, there's a good reason why people of color are not in Napa. And so, I mean, from the 1970s and so I think that, we have to create a different environment. We have to all be in the, we have to appreciate, what diversity and be able to, create, start to dismantle that system, the systems in place here. I know that we're at the end of our time, and so thank you so much. I encourage everybody to come out and breathe it. It's on Sunday is the march, right, for LGBTQ?
Yes, Sunday at 2:30. I'm sorry, Sunday at 10:30 in the morning at City Hall. Masks are highly encouraged and actually I think mandatory now in California since last week. So please just wear your mask, and you can come out with signs. Definitely bring your friends and family and your support.
That's great. And I've seen so many people are at the marches, like 99% wearing masks, and I really appreciate it. And we all do. A couple things, if people are really interested, if you're interested in this own journey on your own, particularly if you are white, a couple of resources I highly recommend is Dr. Eddie Moore's 21-Day Racial Equity Building Challenge. And this is a list, it's online, it's free. It's a list of things to listen to read, and kind of journal about. And it's your 21-day challenge, and it's great. If you're new to this work, it can be a really important place to start and even continue. And then there's also the book Me and White Supremacy by Layla Said. And it's also a 20-day course, actually, a 28-day course, rather, specifically for white people. I know white supremacy, it always scares people off, especially if you're from an older generation. You kind of think of the KKK and other things, but I think it's important to look at, that obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously to me, racism is still here and it's still systemic. And so I highly recommend getting on this path, because I'm getting back on it. And I would like to think I didn't leave it, but I'm coming to the work in a bigger way. So, and I heard everybody, I think we all appreciate, especially those of us who are a little older, is that when you're younger, you often feel like you're a bit of that imposter syndrome. And I've heard some of you say that of our speakers today. And oh my gosh, you are so in the light now. You are taking up space that is so important. And I hope that I helped you take up more space today than I took up. You should never be asking yourself why you're here. Your voice is just so important, and your energy and your passion. So thank you so much. I'm going to hand it over to Arit, who has some closing words.
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you, Gabriela. Thank you. And Jashimar, thank you. I see someone at the back there, Jashimar. Do you want to introduce this?
Yes, this is my beautiful mama rocking her fro.
Thank you for birthing this beautiful soul. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're so proud of him. I'm sure you are so proud of him.
I am very proud of him. Yes.
So
nice to meet you.
I want to also thank Shelly, our facilitator. It takes a lot of energy to put all of this together. Shelly, thank you so much. And Charlie Toledo for the blessing and who you are. I know, Charlie, you have so much more to share. James Baldwin said that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. So on this note, community, let's continue our dialogue, talking, understanding, protesting. There are lots of questions on the chat here that we didn't get the chance to answer, but on our Facebook, we will, you can ask questions, we can connect. Facebook is the best venue for Women's March Napa Valley. We are planning to do once a month forum for a community live stream so that we can really get the chance to meet your mom, for example. And you are all precious, and let's make the next 400 years to be the best years ever. This COVID-19, this is a great planetary reset for us. We can take this time to pause and do the deep work. And we love you, youth. We are following you. Yeah, it's time for us to have the next leaders here. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, community.